And I realized in that moment, like, I am so dysregulated right now. And what a great opportunity to sort of practice some of these things I'm about to go teach. And even with all of these strategies, all I could do in that moment was sit in my car and look at my phone, parked. But it's like I couldn't access those strategies. And it just made me so aware.
Welcome to Innovating Education. I'm Dr. Riley Williams, and in each episode, we explore bold ideas and breakthrough strategies shaping the future of teaching and learning. Today's guest is Erin Thorkilsen, an educator, professor, and founder of Heart in Education, a professional development initiative that centers on the human and relational dimensions of teaching. With over 2 decades in the classroom and a grounding in learning science, Erin helps educators connect learning science to daily decision making, equipping them with tools to manage complexity, deepen student understanding, and lead with purpose. Erin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be a part of this.
Well, Erin, you've worn so many hats in education, from classroom teacher to professor to professional development leader. Can you walk us through the key experiences or moments that led you to the work that you're doing now with Heart in Education?
Absolutely. What stands out to me most is through each of these different roles I've had, continually asking what makes a transformative teacher and what gets in the way of that, both for myself as a teacher, with teachers that I work with that are just starting in their career, with master teachers that have been teaching for a long time, and noticing what are the common pieces that come up in thinking about that question. And it's always the same, and it doesn't matter sort of where a teacher is in their career, where they are in the country, what teachers share that's challenging, that is really at the basis of what we're trying to do in Heart and Education, is their experience with tricky behaviors in the classroom and how that connects to teachers' own well-being. And it's really like a Venn diagram that is, the circles are very overlapped, that when we're able to support students in meaningful ways that feel effective, our own well-being as teachers really come into play. And the sort of maybe more interesting angle that we take in Heart and Education is that a way to help those classroom management pieces is through working on our own well-being, almost more so than in all the things that we're doing to help students. So it's seeing how the same things come up. It doesn't matter where, it doesn't really matter who, but the tools that teachers are needing, and hearing that and talking to teachers about that, of that they need help feeling good and helping their students feel good.
I'd like to talk about learning science. One of the courses that you teach at the University of Rhode Island is the psychology of learning. When
Mm.
you step back, what do you think that every teacher should understand about how learning actually happens? Not just in theory, but in the practical moment to moment decisions that teachers are making every day.
Sure. So much of this probably won't be new to educators listening to this podcast. Not surprising, but that a good refresher to make sure we're putting into our everyday practices, that students construct their own learning. So it's not something that's happening to them, it's something that they're creating, and that it's really driven by emotion. So just, very simply for our young learners, having questions be a part of the beginning of every lesson, and some sort of generic questions, some language I like that can be applied to anything, is what's happening. So, what's happening in winter? What's happening in hibernation? What's happening in the water cycle? Or I'm drawing from Shelburne Farms, teaches a wonderful professional development course called Cultivating Joy and Wonder through the lens of sustainability. And they use the language of what's wonderful. What's wonderful about the change of seasons? What's wonderful about doing math, these sorts of questions that can just engage children in constructing their own learning. And then for that emotional component of it, bringing in characters. So again, I'm thinking of our younger learners, but puppets that introduce learning, having it be about an animal, any of that sort of creativity that is going to make it meaningful to the students, that is basing it in the sort of learning science of how students learn. So remembering to always begin with those big questions. Another good one is, how can this make our life easier? Love using that in math lessons. Like, I think that can sometimes be the trickier way to have students understand the purpose for their learning. So how will learning about fractions make our lives easier today? And beginning lessons that way.
Can you walk us through what happens in the brain when a student is emotionally dysregulated? And how does understanding that change our teaching stance?
Great. Well, I'd love to borrow from Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain and share this too, I imagine you're familiar with it, but share it in a way too that educators can use this with their own children or their students. So if you humor me, and you could be saying this to your students, to take out your hand. And if we think about our hand, our wrist would be the equivalent of our brain stem. And if we open our hand, our palm represents the first part of our brain that developed. And then if we put our thumb in the inside and curl our fingers over, now we have our prefrontal cortex, and it's oriented like this. So where our knuckles are is where our forehead is. And our prefrontal cortex is, and if we're speaking with young children, our owl brain, our wise owl brain. This is when we do our big thinking of empathy and insight and deeper level thinking. And when we have a fight, flight, freeze reaction, when something triggers us, as Dan Siegel calls it, we flip our lid. We lose connection to these higher level capacities of our brain and are just using this fight, flight, freeze part. We're talking to students, we might call this our lizard brain. And so when we're dysregulated, this is where we're operating from, and we don't have that capacity, that connection to those higher level pieces there. So that would be a model, the way of thinking about the dysregulated brain. We've flipped our lids. And I love in sort of doing this with students, sometimes they'll say to me, I'm here, I'm in this place, I'm about to flip my lid. And just even the fact that they can have that awareness of that sense is really powerful. And what was the second part of the question then?
How does understanding that change our teaching stance?
So I think it's common to, and I certainly have experienced myself in my own classroom and teachers I have the privilege of observing, that coming from the best and most well-intended place, when a child is having big feelings, when they flip their lid, they're dysregulated, I always hear teachers say, take deep breaths. We're going to do this together. We're going to figure this out. And, I also taught mindfulness for a very long time. Incredible power in taking deep breaths. This is not to not acknowledge that. But when a student has flipped their lid, sometimes even the act of taking deep breaths or getting regulated can be too much in that moment. That sometimes there's a desire from our wanting to help the student, or just the sort of chaos that it's creating in the room, to stop those emotions right away. When, what we know from learning science and what the research around dysregulation is, that emotions need to be felt, and that emotions actually only last 90 seconds. It's our perseverated thinking about them that keeps them going. So, what we like to offer is that allowing a child in that moment to feel something, and having our role as the educator be to say something like, this is hard and I'm here with you. Or even to not say anything at all. Just our presence of being with the child in that moment can allow them to feel the feelings, to move through that dysregulation, so that then they're ready to come to a place where some of those things that help us bring that lid back on, using our senses, taking deep breaths, looking around the room and naming what's something I can see, can I hear? These things that bring us out of our head and into our body, into the senses, can be used, but to be mindful not to bypass feeling the emotion, because kids need that too, as we do as adults, and that a brain that's here might not be able to do that regulating.
So, how do memory, attention, and emotional state intersect in the learning process? And how can teachers design with that triad in mind?
Great. So, we talked about this a little bit already, and thinking about some of the psychology of learning theory and research, but to use emotion strategically. So, as I mentioned before, thinking about younger kids, lessons told through puppets and characters is going to be a way to sort of make emotion stickier for kids. A mystery box, even as a way to begin every lesson, is going to ignite that kind of emotion. We can think about attention as being what opens the door, emotion as fueling the experience, and then memory is what carries it forward. So with young children, the mystery box opportunity for linking kinesthetic with emotional, I think in read alouds, just to provide a practical tool for teachers, there's so much room in read alouds to make it more kinesthetic. So asking a question like, what is the character feeling right now? What's a time where you felt that? That's going to engage that emotion, but then offering that movement. All right, let's pretend we are Billy who's feeling sad right now. What would he look like? What would this elephant that is feeling grumpy, what would those movements look like? What would its face look like? Are going to be ways that are going to inspire that in kids. One of the most meaningful professional development classes I did was done at the Blue School in New York City, started by the people that founded Blue Man Group Tube. So a really creative approach to learning. And this one lesson struck me for verbs and grammar for young students, and done in a way of acting them out as you would think, what are different verbs? Pecking, jumping, skipping, and then doing that to music, but then this really creative twist that is going to be what helps kids deepen their learning and bring it forward, is to use different body parts to act that out. So it wasn't just your whole system jumping. Is well, okay, how would your elbow jump and dance to this song? Can you peck with your belly button, and what does that look like? And kids, as you can imagine, just love this. So just those really simple ways. I mean, just a lesson like that could be applied and stretched in so many different ways, where it's we think of it as multisensory, which it is, but it's engaging that kind of emotion that drives powerful and meaningful learning and memory, then memorable.
I love that. Wow, I can just I can just imagine myself trying to teach that lesson using a pecking with my belly button.
Unforgettable. We've succeeded in that. Yeah, no. And you can, I mean, just the kids' delight in doing something so original like that. And it shows the effect of it. I mean, I remember it so clearly. So I think that's a case in point of attention, memory, emotion being the key pieces that we're trying to create for meaningful learning.
So, what misconceptions do educators often carry about what works in learning, and
Mhm.
how do you gently challenge those in your courses and your workshops?
Sure. Well, I think completely understandably, there's a desire for teachers to have a room that's calm. And, we want calm, and certainly good learning happens in calm. But to be careful that in that quest for a calm classroom, we're not stamping down emotion, because again, we know emotion is what drives powerful learning. So making sure that there are times during the day. And in my classroom, I had a sound check sign, as I know many teachers do. So sound check being used with students of using our spy talk quiet voices for certain periods, and tea party for snack. But that there were plenty of times during the day, whereas we called it to the moon, where students could have this expressive, joyful time. So that's an example of what making sure that our quest for calm doesn't get in the way of good learning for students. And in general, we could apply that. One thing we teach in our Heart and Education workshops is having teachers explore a continuum where there's students' needs on one end of it and teachers' needs on the other. And so when we think about our school day, how much we're asking students to meet our needs, take off your backpack, sit in your seat, take out your math. And that's cool, that's understandable. But if it's heavy in all meeting the sort of teacher's needs and not enough reflective of the student needs, what do students need during the day? Movement, play, multisensory, social. And how can we, especially I would invite teachers to think about the trickier moments, look at those trickier moments. What's not going well? When are those behaviors showing up? And one approach would be to go heavier in meeting the student needs during that time. So, example, transitions. I think sometimes teachers can get in a rut of sharing, all right, if you have a letter B in your name, if you have white on your sneakers, and go line up, but instead using those moments as a way to, if we're working with young children, make it much more imaginative and really simple. So, one that we like to use, and this creates that quiet and calm that teachers are looking for, is to mouth students' names. So I'd say something like, all right, I'm going to be secretly, silently mouthing name. Show me where your eyes are going to need to be to see if it's your name I'm calling to line up. And then when I mouth, it adds that fun. And then we're going for novelty. So we're not using that every day. The next day it's, okay, I've got this hula hoop here and it's moving back and forth. And when it's time to line up for dismissal, you're going to hop through this hula hoop, but I'm only going to call on ready students that are sitting quietly ready to go. So that's where we're finding that balance in the continuum of our needs are getting met. Everyone's lining up for dismissal safely and quietly, but we're also bringing the students' needs into the picture of having it be playful, having it be social, having there be routine. They know what the structure is, but the novelty of something sort of fun and engaging that's going to draw them in.
That's that hits home. That's very practical advice. So thank you.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. So just thinking about, the age group that you're working with, what do they need? And then how can we direct whatever they're looking to do to be inclusive of that?
Let's go to your toolkit. Now, you lead a workshop that's called Refresh Your Toolkit. What is one classroom dynamic or challenge that educators consistently bring up, and how do you help them reframe or rethink that?
Mm. Uh, Everything I share too helps me also. So it's so fun to just sort of reflect on these different things. So in teaching workshops, started to become this common trend where at the end of every single workshop, towards the end, there'd be an educator that would raise their hand and say, I appreciate all these things you've shared, but I do all these things already. I've done all these things already, and I still have challenges with this particular student. And I just feel so frustrated and defeated about that. So, the challenge that educators are bringing up is that they're kind of stuck and they feel like nothing's working in what they're doing to help change the student. So, what we like to offer in Heart and Education, and I feel like this is sort of our fresh approach for it, is at that point turning the arrow towards ourselves. So instead of more strategies to help this child get from point A to point B, where can we learn? Where can we readjust in how we as the adult are meeting this moment? So in that case, and of course, a lot of teaching is about outcome. I'm not wanting to devalue that. But if that's where we're finding we're getting stuck, we like to invite educators to reflect on what happens when I put outcome aside. Or another way to get at that would be having educators reflect on the question, what's most important right now? And so one of the ways in our workshops we do this is through a repeated inquiry question. Sometimes teachers will say, I feel so silly answering the same question again and again, but that's intentional because it's unpacking. So just like when we might ask someone, how are you? We have our reflex response, which is good, when a lot of times we may not be good at all. And so in this same way, we get to kind of see what unfolds. And it's a great practice too, and just helping adults feel what's right here, which goes back to that helping students regulate and ourselves regulate and giving a chance to feel the feeling, naming what's here. So if you're okay with it, I'd actually like to try this right now, and I'll give you the easier job, which will be the person that asks the questions. So you will just, if you're
I'm
open for trying this.
I'm completely game. Let's do it.
Amazing. Thank you. So I will ask you if you can just repeat the question. What happens when you let go of things needing to be a certain way?
Okay.
What happens when you let go of things needing to be a certain way? And don't change it at all. Don't feel like you need to vary it each time you ask it. We'll probably go through it maybe 5 or 6 times. So you'll ask, I'll answer, and then you'll ask again. And I'll
All
guide
right.
you if we go off track.
All right. Repeat it again because I got distracted in
Totally
that.
understand. What happens when you let go of things needing to be a certain way?
Okay. What's the scenario?
It doesn't matter. You're just going to ask that, and I'm going to sort of see what I say, because what I'm doing is reframing the patterns that I have around that. So we can reflect on it after then too. But let's just go a few rounds.
Okay. So what happens whenever you let go of needing things to be a certain way?
When I let go of things needing to be a certain way, I immediately feel more relaxed. And you ask it again.
And what happens when you let go of things being a certain way?
Perfect. When I let go of things needing to be a certain way, I'm more present to what's actually happening and not as much up in my head. And I'm more present then with whom I'm with. Okay, ask again.
What happens when you let go of things needing to be a certain way?
When I let go of things needing to be a certain way, I feel like I have more joy for what's here. All right, perfect. Pause. So you get a sense of both the experience in having teachers do something that's more individualized, where they're discovering their own patterns, their own ways of thinking. And that is an example of a practice of helping educators with what comes up the most is feeling stuck, feeling like I'm trying everything. It's really often around classroom management behaviors where that stuck feeling can happen, where teachers say it makes teaching not fun, sort of everything we want to be at the core of good teaching. And hopefully is helping teachers come up with some interesting insight that I would argue is best when it's coming from themselves. That's where real transformation is going to occur, because it's meeting teachers exactly where they are, because it's what they're coming up with. So, a little sampling.
Now I'm asking that in my head too.
Right, right. I mean, it's counterintuitive. I think teaching we think of as being outcome related, like helping students get from point A to B. And it certainly is about that. But I don't know, what if we go the step above that? What's it really about? It's about loving kids. It's about knowing kids. It's about helping kids know themselves. So when a teacher's stuck, that can be a really good place to plug into that sort of bigger experience about teaching, and just I think helpful for ourselves. I could even feel it in thinking about our podcast experience of me wanting things to be a certain way, and how freeing it was for me to have those little moments of reflecting on, let me just be with things as they are. And there's real power in that.
Okay, we got really deep really fast. All right, we're refreshing our toolkit.
Letting go of outcome.
Now, you've said that co regulation starts with the adult. What
Mm,
are some regulation practices that teachers can use in the middle of a hard moment?
yeah.
Beyond this traditional breath work that we're always told that we need to have.
Exactly. I mean, that was sort of my experience just from a practical place of hearing teachers say they're sort of wanting strategies, but feeling like the only strategies that are often shared are take deep breaths, get a sip of water, go for a walk. And while those are great, just like our kids, if you're listening in a way where you can see me, I've got my hand up, I've got my flipped lid, dysregulated brain, just like kids can't access those higher level thinking skills when they're dysregulated, we as adults can't either. And can I share a personal experience here?
Absolutely,
Um,
yes.
so, fairly recently, I was preparing to travel to teach a workshop to teachers on being dysregulated as an adult and what to do about it. And I have 1.5-year-old twins, and I had spent the day caring for these twins, major temper tantrums, one of those real like, had to leave carrying everyone. We all got into the car and cried. And I realized in that moment, like, I am so dysregulated right now. And what a great opportunity to sort of practice some of these things I'm about to go teach. And even with all of these strategies that I have and have practiced, long time meditation teacher, and all I could do in that moment was sit in my car and look at my phone, parked. But it's like I couldn't access those strategies. And it just made me so aware of that. Sometimes when we're really dysregulated, and what I find with teachers too is they feel bad about it. Then they're like, I know I'm dysregulated too, and I know I should be taking deep breaths or doing better self-care, and I can't. And so I share all this with the hope of doing two things. One is to normalize that, to normalize our humanness, that when we're dysregulated, it can be really hard to make that choice to get regulated because of the brain science that our brain is simply not in a place to be able to do that. So, what we like to offer is to sort of, as we did with the outcome inquiry question, is to just let ourselves feel what's here. And so, in that moment where I was super dysregulated, if I were feeling what's here, there's ease that can come from noticing that I just want to do something numbing for a moment or to feel my dysregulation. And what happens is, I think, this quick wanting to fix it where we don't actually feel it and then it never really gets resolved, or it sort of perseverates, as I shared earlier, because we're continuing to think about it versus when we can just take a moment. All right, what am I feeling right now? I'm feeling really irritated. I'm feeling my shoulders tense. I'm feeling like I have a lot of regulation strategies I know how to use and I can't use them right now. All I need to do is name what's here, would be another step in it. So compassion for ourselves, recognizing the humanness of it, feeling what's here. And then in some of our workshops, we offer a whole list of strategies for teachers to pick and choose what resonates for them, of little statements to say in those moments. So, I'm doing the best I can right now would be one, or it's okay to feel this way, or this moment will pass. Finding something that we can keep in our pocket to be saying to ourselves, but taking the pressure off of that needing to fix it. So, how to be with it versus fix.
I mean, that's really fantastic advice that you're giving our teachers. We're staying responsive to our students' needs even when we're feeling overwhelmed.
Exactly. Exactly. And it takes a fair amount of being tuned into ourselves. That's where the gift to both our students is when we get more skilled. And that's what we like to do at Heart and Education, is support teachers in their own personal development, having them not just look to the student and ways they can support the student in that moment, but get to know their own, to develop their own awareness, to recognize when they're dysregulated, what are my patterns when I'm feeling dysregulated, as a way to be a better teacher, and then help their own burnout as well, because they're able to use those moments that would create more burnout then instead as a way to support their self-growth.
I know one of the things that I struggle with most is if I am trying to get my work done, right? And then I have all these disruptions. Riley, Miss Riley, Dr. Riley, mom, you know, oh my goodness, just let me work, right? what do I do?
Such a great question. I think, really with anything that's challenging in the classroom or as a parent or caregiver, it can be helpful to sort of divide into two categories of what in this moment could be better systematized. Like, what are my systems around this to help minimize some of those distractions? And then whatever's left over, okay, how can I apply some of this sort of personal development way of thinking to that moment? So, in the classroom, I'm thinking early childhood and elementary, the system of what can cause those disruptions, maybe just are having students have more signals for what they need. So if you're getting constant, can I go to the bathroom? Can I get a drink? And I know these are probably nothing new, but in the refresher category of more nonverbal cues and I love inviting the students to come up with what those signals would be. So it's not going to interrupt your teaching. So with my kindergarten students, my favorite signal they ever came up with was to use the bathroom was this. If you're not on video, it's like little fingers crawling across the screen. It's like, gotta go. I gotta go to the bathroom. But for example, having that, so that way you can continue teaching as students are giving those signals, the nonverbal cues with the children that are needing reminders to raise a quiet hand. So privately with that student, again, involving them in the learning, student voice and choice, what would be a good signal if you needed that little reminder to raise your hand? What should be our cue? It's a little ear pull or something like that. Looking at how that could be developed. I know a lot of teachers use a parking lot system, if you've heard of that before, where students are writing on a Post-it note an idea they have and putting it up on the parking lot to be talked about later, so that minimizes a distraction in your classroom. And then once we've sort of worked out, okay, are there any things that can be improved in the systems department? Then it's not looking to change the external. So applying some of that, what happens if I let go of outcome? How can I find a sense of ease that's not based on not having distractions? It's sort of like, that might not ever change. You may have a great system and all sorts of good things in place, and still those distractions are going to occur. So if we can't change then the external, sort of pointing that finger at what is causing the frustration, all right, let me turn the finger towards myself, and then having it be that self-inquiry question of, why is this irritating to me? Why is this causing this sense of frustration, this disruption? And it's going to be different for each of us. I think, for me, for many teachers, it's that kind of high expectations of, I've got things I need to get done, and this is keeping me from getting them done. So that's then when we can go towards, all right, well, what's that really about? And maybe use a question like, what's most important? What's really most important in my experience of teaching this lesson? What's most important in bedtime? If we go to the learning again, that it's not that they're learning the objective that Wednesday afternoon of how to do division, but that they're having a joyful learning experience. Or what's most important is that I'm enjoying my experience of teaching and centering that in our practice.
So, as we wrap up, what is one key takeaway that you hope educators walk away with from today's conversation?
Gosh, there's so many to share, but we use, in thinking about regulation and dysregulation, or workshops for that, we have teachers and parents reflect on the imagery of a rescue boat versus a lighthouse. And if you think about when a child is having big feelings, are you having the thought that you need to be a rescue boat and go in there and really fix what's occurring? Or instead offering teachers to think about, what would the lighthouse be in those moments of dysregulation? Because what kids, and I would offer any adult, any other human being, they don't need us to fix what's occurring. They need the accompaniment. They need the presence of another person. And so, what is that like to practice as a teacher, as a parent, when a child is very upset, is to be there with them, to be there in our full presence without feeling like we need to just make it go away. And not only is that more impactful for the student, but that Venn diagram of kids' behaviors and our own well-being as teachers, that we're not getting burned out as much because we're not sort of pouring that energy, rescue energy boat way of being out. We're able to kind of hold our own presence a little bit more, and not in a selfish way, but in a powerful way for ourselves, and to be modeling that for kids, for our own kids too. So, are you a rescue boat or a lighthouse? And when those big feelings come up, trying to embody that image, the qualities of a lighthouse.
Wow. Again, I mean, the imagery that you're giving me, it just sticks.
Oh,
So
good. I'm so glad. It needs to be practical. I think when we think about our heart and education workshops for teachers, I'll often begin by sharing how powerful PD needs to be both inspiring, and I think the way that it can be inspiring is by having it be personal, having teachers really uncover and reflect on what's happening for them, but then also really practical. Like, what am I putting in? And you do this so beautifully in the questions that you ask your guest. What am I leaving with that I can use tomorrow? So it's great to get to reflect on those things myself, to deepen them for me as an educator and parent.
that's the goal for sure. So, for our listeners who want to learn more about your work, whether it's through Heart and Education, your courses, your talks, where's the best place for them to connect with you?
I highly welcome anyone that wants to reach out to connect, and that can be through our website, heartandeducation.org, or our social media Instagram page, Heart and Education. You can also find me on LinkedIn. So please reach out.
Absolutely. Erin, thank you so much for being here with us today.
My total pleasure. Really great to get to connect with you. Thank you.
Well, for our listeners, I will definitely be linking everything that we've talked about in the show notes. Also, we are proud to be supported by the Solvia Learning Group, whose commitment to advancing education makes conversations like this possible. So, if today's episode sparked ideas or helped reframe your thinking, please be sure to subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with a colleague. Before we go, if you are a school or district leader looking to strengthen your crisis readiness, please check out my new professional development course for administrators, a peer-led journey to building a continuity of operations plan, now available through Circles at getcircles.org. It's practical, it's collaborative, and it's designed to help you plan for disruption while sustaining student success. So until next time, keep innovating, keep inspiring, keep making a difference, and let's be lighthouses